to all of my beautiful people. I love you too, Meg Paul. We are back for another session of Movement Matters, our Friday symposiums curated by yours truly, Dr. Ross Mikey C. We have an amazing featured artist this week. I met this artist when she was a guest artist here at Wayne State University as an artist in resident, Jennifer Harge, when I first came to Detroit and got to know her a little bit while she was here working with our students and being the amazing artist that she is. She's also a great mentor. So I know a lot of the students are really excited to see Jennifer today. I got to know her a little bit more when we ended up at the New Waves Institute together, which is an intensive in Trinidad that took place, I guess, 2 summers ago. And it was strange that I had saw her here and then we saw each other in the Caribbean and had a good old time down at New Waves. Then I had the opportunity of seeing her perform. I don't remember the name of the work, and I'm sure she'll refresh us, but the setting was like her grandmother's house. She just did this amazing somatic work and this processing of telling this story of her being connected to her ancestry and where she is now. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Miss Jennifer Harge to those of us that don't know her. We're about to get to know her a little bit better. There she is. I had to turn my camera on. I had to turn the grid so I could see.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing? Hey, y'all.
We are blessed, too blessed to be stressed.
Okay, talk about it.
People will keep adding in, I guess. There's about 63 people in the call currently.
Yeah, it's popping in here.
It's popping. You know how we
I see. I didn't realize.
It's not, you know. So, Jennifer, I just want to turn it over to you. And if you could start by just, telling us a little bit about who you are and how you chose your career path that has led you to the point where you are now. Mm-hmm. And then we can talk about the type of work that you do and what you create and what you all about. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy to be here and I'm grateful to be in y'all's company. And so I'm trying to think of where to begin. So again, my name is Jennifer Harge. I am based here in Detroit. I'm originally from Saginaw, Michigan, but most of my family was born and raised in Detroit, Highland Park, to be more specific. And so I spent a lot of time like back and forth between both places. And so I think I've always understood Detroit as a part of my home. But I also never really imagined being here and like living here to be making work. It just what I always knew as a home space, never thought about it as a workspace. So me being here also is kind of surreal in many ways. But I think I always knew that I was going to be dancing. I went to a magnet art school for middle school and high school where we would dance. I had dance as an offering for half the day for 6th through 12th grade. It was a very modern-based program, and that was like the one thing that stuck. Like I was playing basketball, and I was doing, and like I enjoyed academics, but I never imagined my life in those arenas. And I know dance was the only place where I understood myself in like a bigger context. I knew how to ask questions through dance. I knew how to, I understood vulnerability because of dance. I understood like how to be. And I couldn't locate that in other and other things I was interested in when I was like a high school age student. And so I went to University of Michigan for my undergrad in dance. And it was kind of like a no-brainer. I was like, I'm gonna either go to Michigan or I'm going to Howard. Like I knew that was my path. I found a paper I wrote in 9th grade and it was like, what are your goals? And I was like, I'm gonna be a dance major at Howard University. And I was like, that is it. And I didn't go to Howard, as I have already said, which is also still kind of strange to me because I knew from like 7th grade I was going to go to Howard and be a dance major. And that didn't work out, which is fine. And so I went to Michigan. And I think I had kind of been like groomed to be at a place like Michigan because my high school, middle school dance teacher had also gone to U of M for dance. And so I think like I had just kind of been grown. I was born in this classic / postmodern dance world. And then after I left Michigan, I always thought I was going to be a high school dance teacher. Like that's what I had known. That's what I understood. That's like what I imagined my life was going to be. So I got this job in San Antonio, Texas at a private high school teaching modern dance. And I was like, yeah, like this is it. This is what I think I should be doing. This is what I'm going to do. And it was terrible. Like it was, I didn't hate it, but I knew that like I need to be doing more things. Like I understood that I never claimed myself as a choreographer. I never claimed to be an artist. I was a teacher, and something in that role of being there for 3 years at 22, I was just like, oh, there's not enough room for me in this space. So I went to grad school. Like I didn't know what to do. The idea of moving to a city to be a dancer was really terrifying. And so I went to grad school as a way to get more training as a choreographer. Because I knew that was like where I needed to be focusing my attention. And I think it was in grad school, I went to University of Iowa for a grad program, and I was a choreography like emphasis there. And it was there, I think I was like, okay, so I want to make dances. Like that part is very clear. Like that's where I can, I think, flourish the most, is to be making dances, crafting dances, and asking like impossible questions, and they can live inside of dance. And I think, and so my thesis for grad school was actually the piece that I set at Wayne State 2 years ago, the line between heaven and here. And that was a piece that I made. Like I had been kind of like making small iterations of it during my 2 years at Iowa. And then the final piece became the line between heaven and here, or the version that the Iowa people did. The Wayne students did their own kind of rendition of that. But I think I made that piece and I was like, this is it. Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be, or I want to be in this conversation between performance in Black studies, in Black feminist theory, and like it can all intersect. And I think when I learned that that could be a possibility, then my whole world, just kind of opened. So right after that, I left Iowa, I moved to Detroit, and I actually stopped, like right after I had this awakening, I was like, oh, I hate dance. Like it was just, I just got burnt out from being institutionalized. Like I had gone from like undergrad to a private school to Iowa. Like there was never any me freelancing, or I didn't know that meant then. And so I think I just got burnt out. And so I moved to Detroit. I was only going to be here for like 6 months. And I was like, in October of 2014, I'm moving to Brooklyn and we gonna do that. Never moved to Brooklyn. And I was working at Avalon because I was like, I want to work at a coffee shop and go home and not take my work or my ideas with me. I want to like clock in. I want to be, we got the Avalon right now. I want to clock in. I want to go, and that's it. And that was cool for like 6 months. And I was just like, this is not true. Like you actually do want to be living this like impossible dance life. Like that actually is truer to your spirit. And so I remember, like, so I said I was moving to Brooklyn in October of 2014. In October 2014 is when Harge Dance Stories began. And I never like put those two together. Like it was literally after the premiere, which the Harge Dance Stories, we also premiered The Line Between Heaven and Here as our premiere piece. And it was literally after that performance weekend. And I was at home after like, you know, the rush of a performance opening. And I was like, I forgot to move to New York. Like I literally forgot that that was a thing that I was planning on doing until after I had like really then like situated myself in Detroit. And after that, then I was just like, why would I ever move to New York? So yes, I've been here since 2014, making work, being an artist. There was a time when I was like doing a serious adjunct life, working at Wayne, Oakland, and U of M. Had to stop doing that though because of real burnout. And so that was like at the time when I started being awarded these fellowships, which really came right on time because I wouldn't have been able to keep living that that adjunct life in the metropolitan area. So yeah, that's like how I am here, where I am now. Little trajectory. Where'd you go? Ross.
I think he's running between the faculty suite and the studio right now.
Oh, what should I do now?
I love the you spoke about impossible dances, like the impossible life of dance, and like being excited by that. That's really sticking out to me because I'm the kind of the fertile space of the impossible, maybe. You want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Ross is back. Here you are.
Sure. I can say a little bit about that and then we can see what that he wants to do next. Yeah, I feel like because it just never, if you don't create some boundaries, like it can just go off. It never ends. The questions that I think most people in dance are asking, like we could work on them for a lifetime. And so if you're talking about even like you're talking about time, you're talking about space, you're talking like those ideas, like they could last you, yeah, I think your whole life. And so something in that is impossible to like concretize, but there's something in it that you like, because it can go on your whole life, like you have questions then for a lifetime. So I'm like, oh, then like the cup is always full is how it feels because of the kinds of questions that you can ask inside a dance. So I think it was that was like, oh, the real turn on. I'm like, oh, I can just live in these questions where I can't really like get to them, the fullness of them in conversation, but I can find it somewhere in dance. I was reading like an introduction to the new Ntozake Shange book where she's like interviewing and talking about all her life with all these really amazing Black dance artists. And something in it was like how dance is like after and before language. So I think it's something in that like that I can't quite capture, but then it also is like so deeply rooted in the body. And so something about being in that liminal space, I don't know, is where I can be situated, even though it's liminal and it's slippery. But yeah, and I think the impossibility of it and how frustrating dance is why I keep returning to it.
For the non-academics, that liminal space is the space in between.
In between. I just love that word. I ain't trying to be academic. I'm just talking. I just like that word.
Of the liminal space, I think that's where a lot of us tend to constitute ourselves without even really knowing it. Of where do you actually really fit into a space. You talked about a lot of the things that were of interest to you when you were studying, and then you realized like all of these things were parts of who you are as an artist. Mm-hmm. And you talked about feminism, you talked about Black studies, you know what I mean? Like, and heritage and things of that nature. I'm curious as to how you began to start to manifest that within your choreographic process, and what aspects of those particular ideas are more affluent in particular bodies of work that you've created. Like, things are influential on your work, but what's now inspiring you to be the creative force that you are, and to provocate these types of questions that don't necessarily have a definitive answer, because I think that that's an amazing thing about art, is that it is very provocative, and we do investigate these different ways of looking at our perspectives and then projecting certain things. So I'm curious as to how you started to synthesize all these things into your creative process, and then share that with different people, that as an artist in resident, but then also as a performing artist. Mm-hmm. I know that was a lot.
I'm taking a note so I can hit all of it. So I think it began, I keep saying 6th grade, but it might have been sooner, because, and I've said this before, it might have been to a Q&A from Harge Dance Stories, but my very first piece, like concert dance solo I had to create, was in 6th grade, and it was about slave ships. Like, I just went for it, like, bet, I'm talking about this. And that it didn't even cross my mind to do something else. It was like, oh no, I am going to make this dance, because my father had, they still have, they don't use it though, he would have CDs, like tons of CDs in the living room, and like this whole sound system. And so like the teacher I had, you know, I was raised in the dance world where like you couldn't have music with words, you couldn't, like, it was that whole thing. And so I would just spend hours playing those, because he was like, he loves jazz and like this really, you know, multifaceted taste in music. And it would just be all these out CDs. So I'm like, I know I'm gonna find something in here that's not just gonna be like traditional modern dance music that is, you know, like, it wasn't gonna just be like a cello or something. No shakes, I also love that sound, but like that was the only thing we were kind of using in class, like very classical music. So I was also like in a fight to kind of flex a little bit of like, when I show up with my solo, I'm gonna have something with some soul. And so I remember listening to these albums, and I want to say it was the Handel Messiah, like whatever that Black version of Handel's Messiah was. I cannot remember the name of it in my life, but there was a piece on there, and I think it was like alluding to slave ships, or it sounded like it or whatever. And I was like, this is the piece, like this is the music. Like, why else? This is the best song I've come across in 85 songs. You know that journey when you're trying to find the best piece of music. And it didn't, like, that was the only thing that made sense, was to make that piece about slave ships. And so from then on though, like that just kind of stayed, like everything wasn't about slave ships, but like everything was about Blackness implicitly. Yeah, go ahead.
How do you feel like that particular piece in the 6th grade about slave ships was received? I'm curious as to what the response was to something that is such a profound statement from a 6th grader.
So in Saginaw, Michigan, like if you are talented, then they like, baby, go on. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you sing, if you play basketball, if you are a scientist, they like, if we can see you are talented and passionate, they just like, you should go do this thing in the summer. Like, it's a really nurturing community, especially for youth. They see like have some kind of talent or like some kind of academic ability. And so I think in that community is very Black. And so I think too, for them to see it, it was just like, the truth. Like, and that's the truth. Like, it was just like, yeah, you're telling our stories. And I think something about that kind of like affirmation, confirmation about what was happening really played heavily on me. only people who like gave criticism, yeah, was my parents.
Well, I'm curious as to what the sort of performance setting was, because you said the responses was the hooting and hollering, like, yes, you go, girl, you telling our story, which means that your audience would have been predominantly people who identified with some level of that, of the Middle Passage or the slave trade. You know what I mean? So I guess I don't know Saginaw. I don't know the demographic of people there. I don't know. So that's why I'm curious as to how that was received. I know growing up in Northern Virginia, if I had done a piece about slave ships, people would have looked at me cross-eyed. You know what I mean? Like, so curious as to what the demographic of people were that, because obviously that was something that was a proponent of you going forward with this creative idea, with these creative ideas. There was a support system that came from that level of like, oh my gosh, the accolades that came from it is like, oh, I could actually do something with this.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about like at my school, which was not predominantly Black, but like there were other Black children in the class. So when I'm performing that, like those families would be in the audience. But the other thing that I did a lot of growing up is that once also I think about this, probably true for most artists. Like once people learn that you do something, I want you to come perform at the church picnic. I want you to come perform at the Senior Citizens Day celebration. I want you to, like, I was being placed in all kinds of arenas based on dance. And so once people knew that I did that, I was just asked to be at the pancake breakfast on Saturday mornings. Like it was and those are all like Black cultural, like NAACP sponsored this, or like the Deltas, Delta Sigma Theta will be having this. And so like, once you have that ability, you up. Like there's no question, you are up. And I was coming with the thing I had made, and I only had that one dance at the time. And so I kept doing it. And that's also kind of how I learned how to be a maker, because I was always asked to be in places that weren't necessarily built for concert dance. It was like, this is a community event and you are dancing among this crowd. This is not like we're in the audience and you are on the stage.
So do you think that was something that reinforced this notion of wanting to, as you got older and you had that as part of your foundation, that reinforced the notion of wanting to say something with your creative practice and with your artistic expression that had to do with, I'll use air quotes, the Black experience to some extent, or your own perception of that experience?
Yeah, and it needed to be like with folks. Even though I'm in the studio and I'm not always like, everyone is not in the studio with me, like I needed to bring the energy and like the stories of the community I was part of, that needed to be happening inside of the choreographic process. One thing I've been saying in my own teaching this semester, and I'm borrowing from a writer named Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who is a poet, Black feminist scholar, and one of her books called Spill, she is like exclusively citing Hortense Spillers, another Black feminist scholar, in her writing. And she says in her methodology for making that was to be writing with Hortense Spillers. So like not to write about her or not to respond to her scholarship, but like, what does it mean to be writing with her as like an intimate practice of being with her? And I think about that a lot in my own practice of like, yeah, what does it mean? I'm not trying to make a dance about Black folks or about an experience, but like, or about my childhood, but like, what does it mean to be creating with my own lineage, be creating with my own experiences, so that it doesn't become this like exploitative thing on the stage. But yeah, always thinking about like, how am I creating with?
So we had the youth engagement with these provocative sort of topics into your more formalized dance studies as you got older into the masters. So how did you get into this space where you now became an independent artist and you started applying for funding for particular types of work and grants and things? How did you get into that? How did you transition into what you thought you wanted to do, which was teaching, and then getting more into that creative space, and then start going in the direction of trying to support yourself as a creative and an independent artist as opposed to just a teacher, you know?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is manifestation. I said, so I was like in the midst of like I think it was 2018, and I was in the midst of the teaching at Oakland, literally leaving teaching at Oakland, driving to U of M to teach modern. Like just that alone is an 8-hour date, and I taught 2 classes. And I would like come to Wayne on the other days. Like it was ridiculous. And I was just like, I can't do this. I can't live my life this way. And I was like, all I actually want to be doing anyway, not that I don't like teaching modern and other kind of studio courses, but I was just like, I don't care about modern right now. Like, I don't care. Like, I don't care. I will literally show up and I'm like, I don't care. And I knew it was time to move on because I had never had that kind of energy or like attitude about teaching. All I ever wanted to do was like, I want to be a modern dance teacher. And then I was just like, y'all can have this. Like, I don't have a flat back look. I don't care. And so I knew then I was like, okay, so it's time for me to go. It's not them, it's me. It's not the students who are getting on my nerves. It's like, I'm irritated being in this space because I'm not supposed to be here, I don't think, anymore. And so I remember thinking like, what would it even be like to be an artist, like, and to leave? And that alone was just like, this is like all I've ever known to do. What are you saying? And I was like, I need to quit all of these. And so I kind of slowly started being like, no, I'm not available when things would come up, especially the U of M, because the drive alone was just like making me really anxious. And I was just noticing like it was happening in my body when I was saying yes to certain things and how it was responding and like rejecting certain things. And I tried to push past that for a long time. Like, I can do it. And I was like, no, you actually are having a cellular reaction when you are doing certain things that don't serve you right now. And so I remember I started writing in my grant proposals. I started saying like, this fellowship will help me transition out of my teaching life. And I didn't know exactly what I was saying, but I was like, but I put it on paper, I would submit it. And I remember when I would like have a conversation with the program officers who, you know, end up calling you to say you got the grant or whatever, they'll be like, so how's that transition going? I'm like, I did say that. Like, I really did say that I was trying to leave out of this one life to move to my next one. So I think it was just like, I knew it was true. I started writing it down and I started sending it into the world. This particular world started to be fellowships and grant applications. And I also started, I'd always had collaborators around me, but there were 2 in particular, Taylor Aldridge, who curated Fly Drown, and Nadia Tykosker, who had always been there for me and like as like a financial advisor, like kind of, you know, that kind of collaborator. And so the 2 of them together, when you tell them you have an idea, they're like, bet, let's do it. And I was like, ugh, like I could sit on an idea for 2 years and not move. And something about like telling people who you trust your ideas that they can accelerate in a way that they can't do when you're by yourself. And so I had to also learn like, oh, in order for me to move, I have to create a squad so that the thing can move. It can't happen by myself. And so I think, yeah, that was like how the pieces came together. But I think it first started by me writing it down and sending it to the world.
So how are you now, as you moved out of that realm of teaching and now are starting to obtain fellowships and grants to be creative, how are you using that as an opportunity to really engage with your platform, continuing with that provocative way of investigating these questions, or using your art to question, or using your art to reflect certain aspects of your identity. You know, how are you starting to engage with that more in your practice after receiving these grants and going into being a creative artist?
Wait, one more time.
So after you making this transition into now being the independent artist, how are you more compelled to use your platform to express these questions that you were talking, these provocating questions that you were talking about earlier that you may or may not have the answer to? How are you compelled to then further use your platform to express these sorts of ideas, as well as particular socio-political ideals that you want to bring to the forefront of conversations within your community?
Well, now it feels like, now it kind of feels like that's all I got. So, not in like in a limiting way, but before when I had like all this teaching and like doing a lot of other things, like the making was the smallest avenue, like the smallest lane in my life 2 years ago. Like I would rehearse, shout out to Meg Paul at Wayne State every Sunday for, I don't know, 4 hours. That was the only time that I was in a practice, like in my own studio practice with Harge Dance Stories collaborators. So that was the smallest piece of my life. And so now when the other things, like when they went away, then there was, all I then had was to be in relationship with my practice, like my own studio creative practice. And so it just expanded the possibilities. And so now, like, I feel compelled to, like, there's a performance making practice, but I think now I can, for instance, so I made the piece Fly Drown, which you can talk about later, but after that process, I was like, oh, the whole methodology of making that work could be shared, and I want to share it with other folks. So right now I'm making this Fly Drown syllabus, which I think can also be like a Fly Drown curriculum that we can think about Black feminist theory, fugitivity as its own movement practice, which was what I used to make Fly Drown. But it's not mine. Like, I made that piece in collaboration with a lot of stories, a lot of texts, a lot of stuff that I want to then like take the process and turn it inside out. So then it could be, so we can all think about what is your own Fly Drown practice? What is your own Fly Drown piece? It's not a thing I need to like have as my own. Like, I think it can be a conversation with different communities. And so now it feels like the platform for me then is, how can my own performance kind of politics, like how can it have many lives, not just me making dances, but what is the teaching practice? What is the engagement practice? Not to call it an institution, but like, what is the school of thought? And I feel like I can do that now if I'm not like teaching, I don't know.
I get it.
Dance, like modern one-on-one. Like, I'm not interested in that. Like, I'm like, if you're gonna teach modern, you gotta come learn it through this Black feminist fugitivity praxis, which also sounds like so much more fun for me that I can show up better.
But, you know, it's an interesting thing, because when I heard you say, you know, you don't want to teach modern dance,
I keep talking about it.
I thought to myself, you know, the concept of what modern dance is within that space of Black dance. Just watching, you know, Steps of the Gods, I think that PBS special that came on like back in the early mid-90s, I think it was recorded, because I saw Danko when Hope Boykin was still in.
Free to Dance.
They were doing Dunham technique. And so that conversation about what is Black dance, and that conversation that Bill T. Jones implements of like, well, Black dance for him was just anybody dance that was created by somebody that was Black. That's kind of the mentality that I had with dance when I started dancing in college. I didn't know anything about Black dance. You know, I may have heard of Alvin Ailey, but the first piece I ever watched of Black dance choreography, modern dance, was Uncle Tom's Cabin. And it was Bill T. Jones. And I was like, wait, this is dance? I'm thinking hip hop. That's all I knew was hip hop. I didn't know anything about, maybe I knew about ballet, but I didn't know anything about what it meant to be a Black dancer. I wasn't indoctrinated with the notion of Horton technique and Ailey and all that. I transferred to UArts to get that and to understand what the stereotype of Black dance was. But I always had that ethos that Bill T. Jones had. Anything I create is Black dance because I'm Black. You know what I mean? Like, so regardless of who sees it as Black dance, I know it's Black dance because it was created by somebody who was Black. Everything comes through this lens of this urban and this Black perspective. So I find it interesting that probably when you said, I don't want to teach modern, it was that traditional idea of modern and what you have been indoctrinated as to what modern dance is. Because your methodology, this fly, drown, what I was going to say, it's a template for an approach to a creative process.
Yeah.
As a template and a methodology for a new way of exploring what modern dance is. I mean, when you look at the breakaway from traditional modern dance into Judson Church and then all of those other things that started to explore the boundaries of what modern dance can be, I think what you're doing now speaks to that vein of new dimensions of how we are discovering what dance is and what's modern and what's contemporary. So I'm really curious to see the legs that Fly Drown has as a method and as a template to teach modern dance, but then to also teach modern dance through the lens of feminism, through the lens of Black feminist perspective, because that's another thing that we at Wayne State are really adamant about, working towards giving equitable value to things that are outside of the European aesthetic. Things of this nature only add to what we can offer to our students and to other programs. The more that you solidify this as something that is refined into your own understanding, it only adds for more dimension for people to be able to explore how it applies to their own creative practice. Yeah. So with that, can you start to speak to us a little bit about Harge dance, the Harge dance stories?
Mm-hmm. Can I say one thing though before?
Huh?
Can I say one thing though before? Because you got my brain just like.
Sure. Say what you want to say.
Like that. Okay, so yeah, I'm thinking too, like in my own training and how I was brought up to understand what dance is. Like my very first Black company I think I ever saw was Dance Theater Harlem, and I was like, well, I'm gonna do that. Duh. I mean, obviously I wasn't gonna do that. I didn't know anything other. I just thought they were brown, and I was just like, oh, I'm gonna go there. But I'm wondering in my own questioning of this Black feminist fugitivity movement praxis. I gotta find some shorter language soon. I'm working on it. But like, what would that be like in this whole conversation of like decolonize dance, decolonize the museum, decolonize blah, 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 blah. So I'm wondering, like, what would it be like if like Black feminism was our introduction into studying the body? And I'm thinking about that in terms of a lot of different like Black feminist thinkers who talk about Black women as the beginning. And so we want to talk about like foundational ways of being in the body, then we have to turn to Black women. If you think about modern dance, like then we are in a lineage of white women. And that alone is a very dangerous place. Like if we're gonna be real, it's a very dangerous place to be in. Like that's a manipulative lineage to be in. And so like we have to shift our placement in where we begin this training of modern. And so like I'm wondering how my own life would be different if I had been in the study of Black feminist thinking as my introduction into dancing. And don't get me wrong, like I can drop to the floor and postmodern with the rest of them. That's actually my jam. But And I don't mind that being a part of the journey, but like how would our bodies be different? How would our value systems be different if we had started otherwise and knew there was an otherwise to start with?
That's a very profound, like, just idea. And it's in that notion of decolonizing. I keep telling Belicia, because that's something that we have really been working on for the last few years in our approach towards the curriculum. I don't even want to use that word because it's an impossible thing. Like, we live in a world that has a standard that's based on this colonization.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to decolonize because you can't really tell what's of the colonizer and what's not. So, but it is interesting to think about the foundations of how we view what modern dance is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a very interesting thing to see how indigenous people view modern dance, or not even indigenous people, but people that come from a non-Western European culture, the continent of Africa specifically. Mm-hmm. Me coming in contact with traditional African dancers that don't understand that modern is just a concept, and it's not something that's owned by European movement. And when you say modern dance, you can create modern dance with whatever vocabulary that you have, as opposed to thinking that you need to understand the technical foundations of ballet and that lineage into what we call classical modern dance in the West in order to really know what modern dance is. Having lived in Ethiopia, that was one of the things that I really encouraged the people in the community to do, was create movement or create dance with your own vocabulary. And that's the difference between how we think of our creative process. Most of us were given this foreign vocabulary. And then that's what we're now trying to synthesize and manifest our identity and some authenticity of self with all of this quote unquote foreign information. These things that like were given to us, but we don't really identify as a part of us, so to speak. So the notion of how different would things be if we had a different perception or a different foundation of our movement is an amazing kind of thing to think about. And it brings up the notion of approach, and then also what I like to call movement citation. Your understanding of what you're synthesizing and then transmitting as a performer and as an artist and as a creator, and where these things are coming from. You know what I mean? Even though I'm classically trained in traditional modern dance, I don't teach European dance because it's through the lens of my own understanding. So as things get filtered through a certain ideology or a certain perspective, like they can start to take on new form and new shape and new symbolism, because everything is a symbol. Every gesture, it has a certain specific meaning to the culture that it comes from. And within like our culture as African Americans, the things that we transmit may have a different meaning or a different sort of effect in a different environment or a different context. So all of these things that you bring up, I hope are provoking questions to everyone that's here on the call today and anybody that may see it at some other time. So now, can you get into how you started to develop what you now call Harge Dance Stories, and how that came about, and what that really is for you, and what you hope it will provide for the communities that are engaging with it?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Thank you. Also, thank you for the last thing you just said. So Harge Dance Stories really started as a way for me to stay accountable to my choreographic practice. And I knew that if there wasn't like a container for the making to happen, then I would just be flighty. Like I just knew that, I know about myself, that if there is no structure around the making, then the making will not happen. And especially coming off of the MFA program at Iowa, where like you're making dances all the time. We made 8 dances in 2 years, and they're like 10, like they were works, right? It wasn't little sketches. I mean, some of mine looked like sketches, but like that wasn't supposed to be the intention. And so I think coming off of that kind of program, I knew that if I didn't maintain some level of that structure, then my thinking would kind of fall apart. So it began as a container to stay accountable. But then what it developed into was really like a way to remain in practice with others. And so I think about the choreographic process, my own choreographic process is always in this kind of feedback loop between myself and the collaborators. And they were also speaking of Wayne State, shout out to Wayne State, because most of my collaborators in Harge Dance Stories are Wayne State alums, Audrey Johnson, Shanice Rollins, and Nahimana Pony. And so, I was just like picking them up, cherry picking the Wayne State kids. But yeah, they just always, I would come in with these questions and these kind of movement scores, and we would try them. And then one of them was always like, have you thought about this? And I'm like, nope, I haven't. So we should talk about that. Like, your idea is way better than what I had. Thank you for being so invested. That's, I think, really true of all the Wayne students I've ever encountered. Like, the investment was so real, and like it always kind of it took my ideas even in with the students in Line Between Heaven and Here. I remember being like, I've said this piece before, I'm not interested in like doing a remake of the same thing. And so like the thing, it can breathe. And sorry, I'm not answering your question, but just a quick little shout out. But I remember in that process too, they were like, oh, you want us to give some feedback? And I'm like, I absolutely do. Because I think I learned that in working with Harge Dance Stories, how to be in creative process where I can like learn to trust what the collaborators are offering. I didn't really grow up in the world where that was how the room worked. And so I think while Harge Dance Stories right now is still primarily a choreographic space, in the, I think, near future iterations is how can that just kind of feed back into creation loop cycle of information, live in a plethora of ways. I can't quite name them yet, but I'm curious of how that same kind of community of being together, how can that be transmitted to other spaces for folks who don't come from a dance background, but also like want to be in the same ideas and also want to be in the body. I think that is really where Harge Dance Stories has really helped me, of like thinking about multiple ways of being attentive to our bodies that don't rely on our training as quote unquote dancers.
I feel like, and you can speak to this because you'll know more about it than I do, but I feel as though Harge Dance Stories relates to the work that you do with women in the community. Like, you host these, and you could talk a little bit more. You host the women artists coming together. And, you know, I think that using those women artists to engage with almost like how this is happening now with interviews, or allowing them to respond to whatever the workshop is, or to speak about their engagement in specific works of yours or maybe of other people's. That may be a way to broaden out the platform of Dance Stories from just, you know, it being about your choreography, and talking more about dance stories. So all this dealing with women and things of that nature within that context, it may be a way to broaden out the platform, you know?
Yeah. It's made me think about fellowship, which I also love thinking about fellowship, because I also love to be in fellowship. And I think about like what happens when you are in fellowship with folks who you love and adore, and like the thinking and the brilliance that comes out of kicking it, I think is probably it's better than being in class for me. And so like in the living room or wherever you kick it, right? Wherever that spot is for you when you're with folks who challenge you, but it's all in love, right? It's not, I feel like the classroom can get a little aggressive and like a little, I don't know. But something about when you create a setting where folks can drop into themselves and we can go there, we can have conversations where we perhaps don't all agree, which is fine. Like there should be like that kind of tension, like a healthy tension. And thinking about like what bubbles to the surface when those moments happen, and when we create a space to like make that the focal point. I don't know, I've done my most of my learning has come from sitting at friends' living rooms or somebody's like backyard fire. I don't know, a bar. Like my best times of like learning have come from those spaces. So I'm wondering how can we create that all the time? Even if we in the dance studio, how can we make the studio less rigid
and formal? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you just mentioned that, within the notion of the story, I had this conversation recently and was telling somebody that the story that we know of is his story, and that is a white man. Like the story that we know of is through the lens of a white man's experience. And if we don't find platforms and ways to tell our story, then his story becomes our story.
Yeah.
I think it's great that you have this platform, J. Harge Story, dance stories, because dance, as we know, is movement. It's broader than just that subjugated term of what we call movement to be. So you have this opportunity to tell the stories of the people that you're engaging with in the community. And it's very important that we tell our stories and document them. Documentation of those workshops and of these conversations, of this fellowship, it's something that I would encourage you to do, to have more stories to tell. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So I look forward to seeing the developments of Harge Dance Stories and see where that goes and how you can further engage in the community. But I would like you to talk a little bit about the projects, that specific project that you started that is about women coming together for that fellowship. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think you're referring to when Skeleton Architecture came to Detroit. Is that where we are?
You were doing, there was I think it was a series that you did where you hosted women artists coming together to be creative.
All right. Yeah. So that was a collaboration between myself and Claire Croft, who was a dance professor at University of Michigan. And we together had seen, Skeleton Architecture is a group of Black dance artists, women and gender nonconforming artists in New York City who had been curated to be in a performance together by a dance writer, critic, curator, Evia Santois in New York City. And together, Claire and I had seen them, like all 22 of them, win a Bessie's, right? This was like 3 years ago. And it was in that moment of watching them win that Bessie's, I remember us on the phone, like, do you just see that? Like, that was really powerful. And so then the wheels get to turning. And shout out to Claire, though, who did a lot of heavy lifting on just the logistics and the fundraising to make that happen. And then at the time, it was just Harge Dance Story who was going to be in collaboration with Skeleton Architecture when they came to Detroit. But inside Harge Dance Stories was just 5 people. So at that time, that just kind of felt like, well, I think these folks from New York are coming to Detroit, then we need to make it we need to open this up so more people in the city can, you know, be a part of this experience. And so after that time, I reached out to 2 dance artists here, Erica Stowall, who is the dance teacher at King High School right now, and Ryan Myers Johnson, who is the founder of Sidewalk Detroit. And asked them, like, who else, like who should be in the room? Like, who from Detroit should be in the room with these people from these dancers from New York City? And so together we made this, we like created this group that is now called The Gathering, which is a group of Black women identified dancers in Detroit, intergenerational. And so Penny Gaboldo was with us, and myself and Brian. It's like 9 or 10 people total. And we have been thinking about and trying to understand what is it like to be together, especially in a place like Detroit that is so sprawling geographically, and where you can become so siloed in your own movement practice. And so I think the first thing was like, how do we just be like, make it a point to be in the same room? And then it goes back to fellowship, kicking it. And then like letting whatever happens when we dance together, be together, whatever emerges, then we follow that emergence. And so when Skeleton came, we hosted a series of offerings. So there were ones that were open only to Black women in films in Detroit. And then another one, we host like an open sharing of our residency time together. And so, yeah, I think it goes back to though, like putting people in the room and then letting the room and the folks in the room do its magic, and not trying to like place expectations on what should happen in the space. And that is, I'm still learning how to do that in practice. Like it's, you know, you just let the room just show up. Like it's not a trust involved in that way of working. But that's the ethos of it.
That's the learning, is the being able to let go, you know, and put trust in somebody else. Mm-hmm. I want to open up the platform for questions that anyone may have, and I put a couple general questions in the chat. One of the first ones is, how did you overcome any obstacles you faced? And how were you able to combat any fears or doubts that came up as you were reaching for your dreams?
Who asked this?
I don't know. It was a standardized question from a template. I don't know if you remember who asked the question, you know, chime in and say I did.
I'm gonna say, I need to talk to you face to face. Who are you? Expose yourself. Because I don't. I mean, I don't know. I think I'm still working through that. I'm trying to think of obstacle. This is a job interview. I can't think.
Well,
my brain is blank.
Think about it like this: like there have been things that have attempted to impede you from being who you are and doing what it is that you do, but you somehow have stayed steadfast in producing what it is that you produce and performing the identity that you perform every day of your life. What have been those convictions that have allowed you to stay steadfast through the adversity that you may have faced?
So now the obstacle has become clear, and now I can name it. Their name is Jennifer Harge. That is the obstacle, child, because she is in the way. Truly, she's in the way. Yeah. So I'm trying to learn how to get out of my own way, which, I mean, that I think we all, like, that is a human experience. But yeah, I feel like the people who I have learned and like surrounded myself with have been like the most support. Like they helped me launch, but I don't have that ability by myself all the time. Like I said before, I would literally hold on to an idea for multiple years because I'm too afraid to say it out loud. I had a friend last week. I've been thinking about you in this one project, and I've been too afraid to say it. So I'm like hesitant to email you. And she's like, it's going to be good then. You scared to say it's going to be good. And I still have not written the email. That was like 10 days ago. So she sent me the eyes in text. She's like, where you at? I want to hear the idea. I'm like, I'm afraid to say it. Also, I think when that happens, because like, it just might work. That's actually why I'm afraid to say it. And so, yeah, the obstacle is she, her, they, this one.
So what gets you past the obstacle? So how are you able to then say that thing that you didn't want to say? You know what I mean? What is the internal motivation that drives you to get over that fear of not letting someone know an idea? Because usually the fear is somebody's response and being like, yo, that ain't, that's whack.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? What is it internal? Or is it the peers that you have, that your support system that really encourages you to keep going forward, even though Jennifer Harge has all these insecurities that are her own obstacle? What is the thing that allows you to still keep pushing, to keep going with these fears, with these doubts?
Mm-hmm. I think when I remove it from the formality of like, let me send you an email and tell you my idea. But when I can like get on the phone, or if we can like sit somewhere in the same space and now like the room has settled and I'm like, so listen, I have this idea, right? And like I can just share it freely. I learned then that then the thing will release it. Like I can release the thing. And then now my thought is in conversation with other brilliant person. And I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that part. And so, but it has to be like a less formalized way of sharing. And so I think I'm always trying to create less formalized spaces so that we can let those things out. And then once they leave our mouth and into the air, then they are in conversation with so many different things, and beyond my own creative capacity.
I think
but they harbor. I harbor. Whew, it's bad.
You touched on the idea of, in a more relaxed sort of fellowship environment is where all of this creative energy starts to flow. Mm-hmm. And there are many different experiences in life that would probably be a testament to that sort of statement. I think about Parabolis, for instance, and how informal their creative process in developing a lot of their work was, and some of the work became, works that they were known for. But it is that space where you are most kind of comfortable to be yourself and open to just allowing things to bounce off of other people. I too don't like that rigid, structured formal thing. And mm-hmm. all of the students who've had me in a class know that I'm not the type of teacher that they would have expected to have in mm-hmm. their modern classes. Because for me, it's, it's just like, we're all human. This is all information that we have to take in. But if we take it too seriously, then it's going to impede us from actually really embodying it in a fullness, So I think it's
reminding me,
that you are attempting to create those environments. Go ahead.
This is only because I just read/taught a version of this a couple weeks ago, but it keeps showing up. But this is reminding me of Audre Lorde's Poetry is Not a Luxury. And in Poetry is Not a Luxury, which prefaces her more famous uses of the erotic is power, which talks about feeling as a deep sense of knowing. And I think because anyone who's been in an academic institution, we've been trained that our thoughts are the leaders of our knowledge. And she reminds us that no, when you have that feeling of it feels right to me, that is a deep sense of knowing, and that sense of feeling that is your knowledge, that's your power. And so it's not, I think I get caught up and I become the obstacle because I'm trying to wait until I have like fully fleshed out the idea with language and citation and like, you know what I mean? Like references that I can't quite share because it hasn't evolved into that like, you know, scholarship space. But I'm like, oh no, I need to start trusting like the feeling as knowing. And I don't know how to do that always. And so I think that is part of my own part of that fly drown methodology is like honoring that the places where we know.
Your thoughts are taught. Your feelings are genuinely innate. So I'm an advocate of following your feeling. Okay, so another question here is, in this day and time, what do you feel is important for moving artists to know?
What is important to know? I think it is important to know the truth. And it is important to tell the truth. And what does that mean? I think I'm really interested in this notion of subjectivity as the form and like our own subjectivity as the form. That we all reckon with our own past. So it's not just Black folks or people of color who are reckoning with their past in order to like future us in some way, but it's like everyone's work, I feel like. And so I think it feels important to for everyone to do their work and for that heavy lifting to not be up to folks of color to dismantle all these forms of oppression. But yes, I think it's important to like be in truth, and then I think it's important there's a lot of heavy lifting to be done, and I think that we all have some responsibility in that, especially as folks who but movement artists, you know, we are seen, like our work is seen, it's public, and so if you are asking us to be looking at you, like you better make sure I'm watching the truth then. Like don't get up there telling lies, is my personal opinion.
That's a really interesting concept, to know the truth and tell the truth. And that doesn't mean your truth, because the truth is the facts, is what is, you know? So to really know the truth means that you're not just expressing your truth.
Sure.
Another question is, what advice would you give us to stay inspired to create, us being students and everybody on the call or whoever may listen? To create, yeah.
I'm just reading one more time.
So, are you reading it?
Here we go. I just saw it, then I lost it.
So it says, what advice would you give us to stay inspired to create?
Ooh. No.
These ain't easy. I should have sent you these ahead of time. These ain't easy questions to just.
I'm like, keep practicing. And it is my actual answer. Like it's a practice. Like I don't think you just show up one day and you are whoever your favorite choreographer performer is, got there because of practicing. And so like there's no trick. I don't think it's like you gotta practice. And my grad school advisor would always say, after I was like always crying in her office, right, because school was hard. And she's like, I think it's just about maturing in your research. And so something about that has always stuck with me. And so there's a maturity that will happen. It has to happen. And so I think for my own self, I stay inspired by like staying in my practice and like staying through that maturation process.
So she's saying practice being creative. Like
Yeah.
the notion of if you want to work on being inspired to create, then how you work on that is always being creative. It's always finding a way to create.
And being with other creatives. Like that is really why I think the Harge dance stories and her fly drown specifically, like when a shift happens, when I was in the presence of other creative, and most of the time creatives who weren't in dance. And so that there was just like a constant sharing of information from different disciplines. So we can like bounce off of you, visual artist, I can bounce off of you, musician. And so we are all, which has always happened in any non-Western form of art making. Like it was always a conversation between artists, not just like the people who you study in the dance studio with. So I think the biggest thing for me too, has been like, in conversation with a plethora of different kinds of artists and thinker, like in scholarship, all of that.
One of the things that you mentioned before was not having this rigid, formalized approach towards your creativity, towards your practice. You know what I mean? When it came to like the studio life, there isn't some one way in which we can engage with our practice in the studio. Finding more ways to be inspired by things that are outside of the norm of the tradition, you know, think outside the box. Many of my students have heard me say, like, I am inspired by life. I call myself a lifist and not an artist for a reason. There are all of these things in life that happen and manifest that inspire me to then transmit my perspectives of what it is that I'm experiencing. So the inspiration is all around you. You don't really have to look too far. Dana Gamara says, be around those who believe in you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a very, you know, they say you're only as good as the company you keep. It's not really healthy to be in an environment of people who don't support your notion of wanting to be creative.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of an obstacle that you need to move around. Matt gave a comment and he said that the humanizing effects of the environments that y'all are talking about cultivating feel especially important as an antidote to the illusion of everyone has their shit togetherness cultivated in social media spheres. So
Matt!
So yeah.
You want to say more about that, Matt?
Yeah, what you can speak a little bit more about that, Matt.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I guess this is kind of circling back to the conversation when I think you were responding to the question about like about overcoming obstacles or combating fears or doubts and whatnot. And yeah, I guess that just had me reflecting on, especially in this time when it's like it's not as easy to be sharing like physical collaborative space with folks, and there's like a lot more of the way that we're connecting is like virtual and digital and in this like virtual space. Yeah, that I think like personally for me as an artist, you know, I see myself going through these cycles of just kind of like having to step back and be like, wait a second, like, you know, this is what I'm seeing on social media right now. Like this is curated. This is like, you know, this is not a reflection of like what the vulnerability and the not knowing and like that side of the creative process. And just Jennifer, hearing you talk about the spaces, like the fellowship kind of spaces that you try to cultivate, in the sense of like, oh, like, you know, having these fears and doubts and like feeling like the thing comes together when you have other people to kind of bounce ideas off of. I feel like, yeah, that just has me reflecting on being in dialogue with artists in the moments when the moments where I feel like my guard tends to go down is the moments where I'm just kind of like, oh yeah, that person is like asking questions. That person doesn't know. I don't know either.
Yeah.
Like we don't know. Actually, this is reminding me something I'm currently this is kind of coming more from therapy practice because I'm studying to be a therapist right now. But something that some folks some props to my program kind of come back to is like, I don't know, but together we do.
Yeah.
That's like a mantra that comes up. And that's kind of the energy that I'm sensing. And that gives me this somatic sense of like, oh, okay, like I can put all this weight down. Like I can put this weight down of just like, I need to be like carrying this and I need to be like impeccable. And
can I add one thing to that? I feel like, so I asked and I just went. But I feel like I don't.
Yo.
I know, but I'm just trying to be with the folks, you know. But I think about like, I don't know, but together we can practice something. Like we have a rehearsal and we begin our rehearsal with these questions, and then it's like, I don't know, how about we try and like we can work towards something. And I think that is where collaboration is the most profound thing, because we can together now we can work towards, or I can help you work towards your question through my own avenue, which is usually a movement based thing, and then you can enter in through sound or the body or through, you know what I mean, through lots of other things. But I think it's like when we put the question in the room. I also learned about that in school. Like whoever puts the first question in the room, we are now living in the world of your question. And I didn't used to speak up as a student, but I'm like, oh, if you put your question in the room, like people will stew on that question for, it could be the whole class sometimes. And so I had to learn that later in life of like dropping in that way.
Put that question out there. Speaking of questions, we got Nandi Jack that wants to ask a question. Nandi, unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm sorry. I apologize if you hear background music or anything. Like, me and my roommate are both in Zoom class right now. But one thing that I just want to say before I say my question, actually, I find a lot of parallel between my life and yours, Jennifer. It's really interesting that you said you wanted to go to Howard. Howard was actually my first choice, and I feel like I can say this here because I'm in a safe space. I went to the audition for Howard. I got accepted to the dance program. I was ready. My mom went to Howard. I was like, Howard University. And then, of course, COVID came, and then like finances came, and it just wasn't really the path for me at the time. And then it's actually funny that you said you worked with Miss Niamana, because she was my teacher when I knew her as Miss Amber. She taught at Detroit Winter Dance Academy.
Yes.
So there are just like a lot of parallels between my life and yours, which is why I feel like you can answer this question for me. I love teaching. I've taught in multiple places. I've taught children. I've taught people who are my age. I've taught people who are older. And I genuinely love teaching. Like, I've been surrounded by teachers my entire life, and I just admire and aspire to be like them, because I feel like the most powerful people in the world are people who teach, and I want to be able to do that. So my question to you is, like, from when you moved out of your undergrad and even into your master's degree, but even going farther after that, wherever you felt this, what helped you initially make your transition like sustainable or healthy for yourself going into being a teacher? Like, I know you were saying that you didn't really like it on the back end of it. You kind of understood that that's where you didn't want to be in life. But what was that first thing that like inspired you, and what really drew you towards teaching, and how did you sustain that for yourself? Because that is something that I really do want to investigate.
Mm-hmm. I think, like, similar to you, I think I was just surrounded by teachers my whole life. And some of them were like my actual teachers in the classroom. And then some were mentors who I just called my teachers, who weren't usually in dance. And I think I was inspired by them, but also like the energy I used to feel in a dance studio, like sharing with folks and like watching people take my movement phrases and like go across the floor with it, was just like the most exciting thing that I had known, was being in class with folks and watching this thing I had made in my living room or whatever, you know what I mean? When you're teaching, like sometimes you don't always have studio space, but to like watch those physical ideas manifest in the classroom, I think was what like initially made me understand that I needed to be in some studio practice as a teacher. What was the second part of your question?
That was really it. I was just like drawing similarities between our two lives, and I just thought you were appropriate to answer the question because of that. But you answered the question.
But I think it was like really was like a physical response I would feel in teaching, especially like teaching any kind of modern contemporary. I used to teach jazz a lot in a former life. I don't know if I would do that. If I could do that now, I probably don't have like the ability anymore. But I just remember like what it would feel like when we would like get past warm up and it was time to dance. It was nothing better. Like I lived for that feeling, and I still love that part of a movement class. But yeah, I think it was like me listening to so I knew it was time to go. My body was having a very different reaction when that point in class came, and I still was just like, I don't want to do this. Like, that's when I knew it was time to make a shift, like a little pivot.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So does anyone else have a question that they would like to ask Jennifer Harge? Yes, no, maybe? Okay, well,
Biba Bell.
Go ahead, Biba.
Hi. Sorry, I gotta put my phone on mute real quick. Okay. Hi. Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's so great that you're here, and thank you so much for your generosity and sharing about your work, your process, and your life and being. My question is sort of is I guess more on the pragmatic side of things, which isn't always where I converse, but I'm curious just in terms of, you know, students. I work a lot with the students who are kind of moving towards their springing out, you know, the kind of end of the degree cycle. And there's a lot of like discussion. And I think that also just that you had that moment of like, I'm moving to New York and then I forgot to move to New York. What happened? I love that. And I'm curious about your experience, or just maybe your perspective and sort of the field or the terrain, the ecology of being a young artist and kind of beginning to find that ground out of the institution, because it does provide such a support in certain ways, like even just, and then also, you know, not in other ways, but in terms of like practicality of, you know, space, of making work, of developing and engaging with the community and slash audience, how you sort of see that happening here for folks that don't want to move somewhere else, or like, hey, I just got here and I'm at the beginning of engaging with the complex and nuanced fabric that is Detroit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like Detroit for dance right now feels fertile to me. And even in terms of space, I think about when I first got here and I first made Line Between Heaven and Here in 2014. I can't think of one space, like one dance space that wasn't a part of a university or a private studio. Like the Andes didn't, like the Lightbox, they didn't, not that we have a lot of dance spaces outside of those places, but like those places didn't exist. So even even those two places being here, I feel like shifted the amount of dance practice that was, not even just like dance performance, but not a dance practice that was going on. And that is like my own dream, is for us to have spaces to be in practice outside of institutions, because that I think is where like really rich dance ecosystems happen. Not to be compared to New York, but I think one thing that makes it what it is because you can have a process residency for a year, or a space residency for a blah, blah, blah. And I think about Collective Sweat, who is making those kinds of possibilities in the city. And so we could be like developing our work in like this research-based process, and not just like you get a grant to have a performance. Even though like for the past 5 years, you never gave us money to like have studio space. So I think there's like a shift happening into practice in Detroit, where I think is a perfect space if you are just freshly out of an institution to be making, where it's not just like, okay, you out, now you gotta go be in a company, now you have to go be on stage, where also like our world has shifted, where like what we thought about as performance is different now, right? And so like I think it's, in my own opinion, I think this time it's asking us to like be clear about what your practice is. And I think that Detroit is a place to make that very possible. And like to realize, and like you can do it really underground in a way that I don't know if you can in a lot of other large dance cities, or cities with more like infrastructure for dance. Is my first take on the question.
There's a lot more processing of the question that I'm sure can manifest different perspectives as well. Are there any other questions from the Peanut Gallery? Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
So I was a freshman when you came and set that work 2 years ago where Brooklyn sang.
Yeah.
And I just remember I had never like seen anything like that, and I was blown away by it as a musician and like a budding choreographer. So I was wondering if you could talk more about your decision to use like vocalization and how you have worked that into your choreography, and like what you have found helpful and interesting the most.
I love singing. I love singers. I think every rehearsal process I've been in, I would say like the last 10 years, one of my first questions in our first rehearsal is like, anybody in here sing? I need to know that like very early on, just in case it shows up. It doesn't always show up, but like if I know that people have other abilities, I'm like, oh, it should live in the dance. Like it should be a multi-angle kind of piece. And I think it's a lot of that comes from the way I grew up, of like, if I was at that pancake breakfast dancing, there was also the person with the saxophone after me, the person who does poetry read after me. Like we were always all together. And so I think all of those sounds have always informed my making. And so I think also, somebody can sing when you ask them, can they sing? And they're like, and that's what Brooklyn did. And I was like, I bet you she can really blow. And she can. And I think it just had to be in it because it just had to. Like some things are just non-negotiable, right? And you're making. And so I think I'm always trying to think about what else can live in it. Not that I think dance is boring, but sometimes I think dance is boring. And not that like I probably shouldn't say that, but I always need dance and I always need movement and. So if it's not like some other kind of sound, I'm like, well then can we be on the street and do this? Or like, can we do it in the bathtub? Like I just always need multiple materials in the space.
I think that's it's a testament to, like you said, your upbringing, but it's also a testament to the notion of there really is no separation in what we call performance.
Yeah.
Especially within indigenous cultures, and looking at Africa specifically, music, song, and dance and theater are all integrated, and they're all very reflective of life experiences.
Yeah.
So, again, our formalized kind of Eurocentric way of compartmentalizing things makes us think that dance is just supposed to be about the movement to some music. but it's a performance, and dance can incorporate text and incorporate song and incorporate different types of musicality, and it still be considered dance, you know?
I think that's actually, thank you for saying the word performance right now. It's actually when my brain shifted. I think when I started, I'll take it back to Kresge, right? So I had been applying for Kresge fellowships in dance, never got it. And I was just like, I don't get it. Like my ego also was just like, excuse me? And then I stopped applying in dance and I started applying as a performance artist, because I also like stepped back and was looking at what I was submitting as my materials. And I'm like, oh, yeah, there's a couple different things going on here. Also having friends looking at my materials too and asking, like, you see this, what do you see? And when I shifted my own focus to being a performance artist and not dance, something about that shifted for me. So like all those things like singing and text or whatever, they all just folded into the space really naturally, because like the idea of performance, it's a performance. And so there's like a vibration that happens when I think there are several different entryways into it. And so, yeah, that was also a pivotal moment for my own self, is to think of myself as a performance artist and not always a dancer.
Cool, thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, if there's nothing that Jennifer, that you have a burning desire to share with us thus far, we can close this symposium out. Like, it's 11 o'clock. You know, I'm sure people need a little break. The Zoom fatigue sets in. So Jennifer, you are amazing. We all love you.
I love y'all.
Have you in this space with us. We look forward to you coming and sharing your gifts with our student and faculty at a later date, which I'm sure you will. Continue to be the vessel that you are, and creating these platforms, not only for yourself, but for the communities that you're engaging with, to have a space to express their viewpoints. We're grateful for you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So look forward to seeing you again soon.
Grateful for you. Thank you for the invitation, as always.
No worries. Everybody else, have a good day. Have a good weekend.
Yes, good weekend. It's supposed to be nice today, so we should go outside.
Yeah.
Because next week, I think it's over.
I have to teach modern dance.
And I want you to kill it, okay?
Love you all. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. See you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, thank you. It's good to see you, Biba.
So good to see you. Oh my goodness. You're out there.
Thank you. I know, right?
Nobody can hear.
Brooklyn!
Jessica, nobody.
Love you.
Love you, Brooklyn.
All right, y'all. Peace.
All right, bye.